If I had to pick one guitar player that's taught me the most about lead playing, it would have to be the great Charlie Christian, and his solo on Honeysuckle Rose, well, it's a goldmine of valuable lessons in terms of how to play over chords. You'll see I'm using a suitable guitar. This is a 1938 L50 converted into an ES150, like one of the guitars Charlie Christian famously used. And you'll see behind me, I'm using a very suitable amp. This is a vintage 47 VA185G. Now, if you would like my PDF with the tab and notation, as well as me playing that at a slower tempo for you to practice along with, you can get that on my Patreon page on the lowest tier, link in the description. Now, I am sure you agree that was one whirlwind of a solo. It's at 220 BPM. The phrases just keep flying at us. So one suggestion before we get into it is that you slow it down. Use some audio software to slow the thing down so you've got time to kind of really absorb what's going on. Now, I said at the top of the video how this solo is full of valuable ideas, great inspiration for improvising. I'm going to pick out 5 things that I think you can take away from this solo. But what I want you to do, you may obviously want to learn the solo first off, like I've done. Don't worry if you can't get it to 220 BPM, even playing it at a slower speed, it's still going to be a valuable lesson. But what I would urge you to do is imitate the kind of ideas he's doing so that you can take something away from his playing and incorporate it in your own. But always try and do it in your own way. At least that's how I've always approached improvisation in terms of taking inspiration from my favourite players. And you might think some of these ideas are incredibly simple. I often think those are the best ideas to steal. Now, the standard key for this tune is F, and that's the key I taught it in my YouTube lesson, which if you miss, you can learn the chord changes, and I do a breakdown of the harmony. I'll link that in the description, but this particular recording is in the key of D flat. When I was first getting into soloing, one kind of very naive thing I did was take things so literally and say this A section, which is A flat 7 to D flat. When it's on that A flat 7, I would just stick to A flat 7 arpeggios. Now, of course, you need to get your arpeggios down, but it's only really when you study the greats, whilst you'll have a player which largely uses chord tones, say, they emphasize notes of the chords, you'll find those chord tones, or some of them, very prominently placed within lines, but it's the other extensions or it's the chromaticism which pads out the lines. Take a look at the first line that he played. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that last note really is an anticipation of the D flat. So being able to do things like that myself really only clicked when I actually thought about what was going on there. So looking at that opening phrase, or the opening line, I've got 1, 3, 5, 7, but let's analyse what he plays. That opening phrase I absolutely love, and it sounds so sweet and interesting because he's going 3, 5, flat 7, 9, up to the 13th, and then 5 down to back to the 9. So whilst we have got some of our arpeggio notes, we've also got the 9th and the 13th as notes which just bring an extra bit of sweetness on top, if you like. That's followed up by 3, 1, 9, 13. Happens to be fret 13 as well. And then the next phrase. See, that's more scalar, if you like. That's 5, 13, up to the flat 7, back down to the 13 and the 5th. And then we get the 4th, the 3rd, the 9th, or the 2nd, back to the root. So, going back to what I said earlier, 1, 3, 5, 7, it's all there. But it's the presence of the other notes. In this particular instance, we've got the addition of the 2nd or the 9th, and the 4th and the 13th. There's no chromaticism in that particular bit, but in other aspects of the solo there are. So one very simple thing you can do, let's say you're playing over a song and you're using the arpeggio tones. I know this is very simple, but I think it's, you got to know about these natural steps to take. It's, you got 1, 3, 5, 7, but particularly on a chord like a dominant, you could add in, things like the 9th or the 13th, just for bringing in additional colour, and then using, say, chromatic notes as passing notes between chord tones, say. But the key thing when you do it, you've got to package it well. That means usually resolving to a chord tone at the end there. So, he finishes the opening line on the kind of phrase finishes on the root, and that's the same with the second A section. There's a big long line that finishes on the root also. If you want some help with using arpeggios, chord tones to solo with, which covers a lot of what I've just spoken about in more detail, then do check out my series here on YouTube, Making the Changes. The second thing I'd like to draw out of this solo is when it goes to the 1 chord, a D flat major in this key, he plays bluesy kind of phrasing over it. So instead of treating it like, I don't know, D flat major or D flat 6 or even D flat major 7, he's playing basically the blues over it. And looking at the intervals, we've got the flat 3 in there, going to the 3. He does that, just the one time actually. And then we've also got the flat 7 going down to the 6, and then back down to the 5th. That's just a classic. If you listen to the pool of notes, really classic sound against a major chord. But if you took the fact it's D flat major too literally, you wouldn't play that over it, because you'd be playing D flat major, D flat 6, D flat major 7 over it. So, if you package the phrasing convincingly with confident rhythms, you can play bluesy over the 1 chord. Just because it's not blues doesn't mean you can't do it, and it's something I learnt from him, and I do a lot in this song and in other tunes too. I also love in that line the way he just lays onto the root really confidently. It's more like what a brass player would do. Most guitar players would have played 10 notes in the space of those 3. So I love that simplicity of that. He also finishes on the triad like that, which again, that going back to what I said in the first point, that's putting those chord tones placed very prominently here at the end of the phrase. Looking at the third A section, a great device he uses is a pedal. So in this section we got all of that first bit. The pedal is where he keeps playing these two A flats, an octave of A flat, against the A flat 7. But then he changes what he does against it, because he goes A flat up to A flat, back to A flat in the lower octave, but then goes to the G. So you get this tension. I know they're not played simultaneously, but you still hear that. So you got the A flat, and then he's descending to a G on the B string, which for me creates an incredible bit of tension, because we've gone from kind of flowing notes in the B section to suddenly we're just getting A flat, and then this G. So it's a good way to build tension, and you could do all sorts of things with it. You could take it further. That kind of idea, and you play high notes. But just playing one note, it doesn't need to be 2 A flats actually. I could go. Just keep playing A flat and then put other notes against it on the string below. Something very simple you can try in your solos. Works particularly well against one chord, like here we've got 4 bars of A flat 7, and it creates tension, because here when I go, sorry, there, the tension exists when you get a note which is dissonant against the note which you're pedaling. So pedaling's a great concept. You keep playing one note and put other things over the top of it, and it gives you that interesting harmonic rub of in and outside sounds against that. So really simple device to steal there. The fourth thing I would pick out from this solo is his anticipation of the next chord, which if you've not studied any of his solos before, it might be a new concept to you, which is the idea of he will play a phrase leading into the next chord. Rather than waiting for that chord to arrive and waiting for the bar line to come, if you like, or beat one, he plays the chord slightly early, or plays his phrase, I should say, slightly early. What this does for me, it gives his solo a real sense of forward momentum and urgency. And just looking on the music, you know, it happens at the end of line 1 here. He plays the 5th of D flat, and that anticipates the phrase of the D flat. At the end of line 2, you'll see these 2 notes here. That is really the start of the next idea for the A flat. It also happens in the B section, going from G flat to E flat, and it happens really overtly in the 3rd A, where he plays a D flat triad, you know, on the end of 3, leading to the D flat coming in bar 29. So it happens quite a few times, and something to try and get used to. The way I get used to this is you need to have like a note to target for when the chord starts, right? So say the chord was A flat, and you're going to play an A flat against it. So what you could do before the bar starts is maybe you could approach it from below. So 1, 2, 3, something like that, or from above. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that sort of thing. So practice. What you need to know where you're going. So practice having a target note for when the chord comes, but try doing what's called a lead in. Anticipate the chord. Could be by 1 note, 2 or 3 notes, 4 notes. Experiment. And a little tip there, I find it very useful to use chromaticism to do that. 5th and final thing is his solo has a strong sign-off. And I think this is really important. And it's this idea of when you finish your solo, it should be super obvious to other people you're playing with that your solo is coming to an end. One of my pet peeves would be people's solo and it spills into the next chorus. And it's like you started to take away from the next person's chorus, if you like. So what you have at the end of his solo, you got that. First off, that's just a D flat triad. So that immediately is quite like, statement, quite strong. That could be the end of the solo. Finishes on a D flat as well. But then you go. Da-dum. The 5th going to the root. What could be more final than that? Maybe the 7th going to the root, you know, as well. But it's kind of neatly packaged and signed off, like full stop, finish on the root. Whereas if you finish on intervals outside of the chord, yes, it can work, but nothing sounds stronger than finishing on your chord tones. And that kind of makes sense for the listener. Then if you have a solo which kind of fizzles out, you know, at the end, it sounds unconvincing. It doesn't sound like you're finished, and it sounds like you're going to go round again. So obviously in these scenarios, I'm sure because of recording limitations, they were like, look, you've only got 1 chorus because, you know, then we're moving on to the next person. So they would have known that, I'm sure. But even still, his solos often have a very strong finish. It's obvious they're coming to an end. And one way you can do that is by using things like triads, because they spell out a chord, but also just ensure that you resolve to chord tones at the end of the phrase. And that's something I spoke about earlier, and I think it's key to making your ideas and phrases make sense. So something to try and take from him, definitely. Now, I've made a few other videos about Charlie Christian solos. I'll put those up on the screen for you to check out, because what I find is if you study several solos by the same musician, you start to pick up on their traits, and their influence can become more readily kind of available to harness for you when you're improvising. But like I said earlier, you've got to make an effort to understand what they're doing, what is making certain phrases really work. And for me, it comes down to an understanding of intervals, an appreciation of kind of where those intervals are placed. And then, you know, you imitate them. The rhythms kind of absorb and become part of your playing, but you might be using those same kind of ideas in completely different contexts, and that's when you know that influence has rubbed off. But that's my thoughts on it anyway. If you've got any questions, any comments, you leave them below. Don't forget jazz guitar videos every Monday. Please check out my Patreon page linked below. But until next time, you take care.